In the cold winter of 1884, a group of powerful men gathered in a grand palace in Berlin, Germany. This meeting was not about European affairs, but about a continent far away, Africa. The host was Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany. He invited representatives from 14 nations to attend. These nations included major European powers like Great Britain, France, Portugal, and Belgium. They also included the United States, though its role was more of an observer. The meeting, which lasted from November 1884 until February 1885, would become known as the Berlin Conference. It was a pivotal moment that would change the map of Africa forever, setting the stage for decades of colonial rule and conflict. The purpose of this grand assembly was to lay down rules for the European colonization of Africa. It was a gentleman's agreement, but the gentlemen were all European. No African leaders were invited to Berlin. No one from the continent whose fate was being decided was present to speak for their people, their kingdoms, or their land. The decisions were made thousands of miles away by men who had little to no knowledge of the diverse cultures, languages, and political systems that existed across Africa. They saw a vast continent rich in resources, and their goal was to divide it among themselves without going to war with one another. The conference was, in essence, a plan for a peaceful European invasion. The main attendees were the heavyweights of European imperial ambition. Great Britain, with its vast global empire, was a key player, eager to secure its existing territories and expand its influence. France, its historical rival, was equally ambitious, seeking to build a massive West African empire. King Leopold II of Belgium had a personal and deeply exploitative interest in the Congo region, which he cleverly presented as a humanitarian mission. Portugal, with its centuries-old trading posts on the African coast, wanted to protect its historical claims and connect its territories in Angola and Mozambique. These powers, along with others like Germany, Italy, and Spain, were the architects of Africa's new political geography. The conference itself did not partition Africa on the spot, but it established the framework for doing so. The key principle agreed upon was called the principle of effective occupation. This rule stated that a European power could claim a territory on the African coast only if it had an effective presence there. This meant they had to establish treaties with local leaders, fly their flag, and set up an administration to govern the area. This principle triggered a frantic race among the European nations. They rushed to send explorers, soldiers, and administrators into the African interior to plant their flags and claim land before their rivals could, a process that would become known as the Scramble for Africa. The reasons behind the Berlin Conference were a complex mix of economic greed, national pride, and strategic competition. The Industrial Revolution in Europe had created a massive demand for raw materials. Africa was seen as a treasure trove of resources like rubber, cotton, diamonds, gold, and ivory. European factories needed these materials to produce goods, and their economies depended on finding new markets to sell those goods. Colonizing Africa offered a direct and controlled source of these valuable commodities. It also provided a captive market, forcing African populations to buy European manufactured products. This economic motive was a powerful driver for the imperial push into the continent's interior. Beyond pure economics, there was a powerful sense of national rivalry and prestige at play. In the late 19th century, having a large empire was a symbol of a nation's strength and importance on the world stage. Countries like Great Britain and France were locked in a constant competition for global dominance. Germany and Italy, newly unified nations, were eager to prove their power and wanted their own place in the sun by acquiring colonies. This competition created a domino effect. When one country claimed a piece of Africa, its rivals felt compelled to claim their own territories to maintain the balance of power. The fear of being left behind fueled the rush to colonize. A third, and often publicly stated, reason was the supposed civilizing mission. Many Europeans at the time held racist beliefs that they were a superior civilization. They argued that it was their moral duty to bring Christianity, commerce, and Western civilization to the Dark Continent. This was often used as a justification for the brutal realities of colonization. Missionaries, explorers like David Livingstone, and politicians framed the colonial project as a noble humanitarian effort to end the slave trade, which Europeans had dominated for centuries, and to uplift African peoples. This rhetoric masked the underlying motives of exploitation and control, presenting conquest as a charitable act for the benefit of the colonized. The immediate trigger for the conference was the growing tension over the Congo River basin. King Leopold II of Belgium had cleverly established a vast personal fiefdom in the Congo, calling it the Congo Free State. He claimed his intentions were purely philanthropic. However, his actions sparked alarm in France and Portugal, who also had interests in the region. Fearing that these competing claims could lead to a European war, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called the conference. His goal was less about Africa and more about maintaining peace and stability in Europe by managing the colonial competition. He wanted to ensure that the carving up of Africa happened in an orderly fashion, preventing direct conflict between the major powers. The Berlin Conference unleashed what is famously known as the Scramble for Africa. This was a period of intense and rapid colonization of the African continent by European powers between roughly 1884 and 1914. Before the conference, European control was largely limited to coastal areas and a few scattered territories. After the conference, the race was on. European nations dispatched explorers, soldiers, and officials deep into the African interior. Their mission was to sign treaties, often fraudulent or misunderstood by African rulers, and establish a physical presence to claim the land under the new rules of effective occupation. This frantic rush resulted in the near-total subjugation of the continent within just a few decades. The division of Africa was done with a ruler and a pen on a map in European capitals. The borders that were drawn paid no attention to the realities on the ground. They ignored the existing ethnic, linguistic, and cultural boundaries that had shaped African societies for centuries. Straight lines were drawn across deserts and through mountains, arbitrarily dividing unified kingdoms and ethnic groups. In other cases, rival communities who had been historical enemies were forced together into a single colony. This careless map-making was a recipe for future instability and conflict, creating artificial states that struggled with national identity and internal divisions long after the colonial powers left. By 1914, the results of this scramble were stark. About 90% of Africa was under European control. Great Britain and France held the largest colonial empires. Britain's possessions stretched from Egypt in the north to South Africa in the south. A vision often described as the Cape to Cairo dream. France controlled a huge swath of West and North Africa. Belgium's King Leopold II personally owned the vast and resource-rich Congo. Portugal expanded its old coastal claims in Angola and Mozambique deep into the interior. Germany, Italy, and Spain also carved out smaller but still significant colonies for themselves. Only two African nations, Ethiopia and Liberia, managed to remain independent. This process of division was not peaceful for Africans. While the Berlin Conference prevented war among Europeans, it sanctioned violence against African populations who resisted colonization. European armies, with their superior weapons like the Maxim gun, ruthlessly crushed any opposition. Treaties were often imposed by force or deception. The scramble was, in reality, a violent conquest. It was a systematic takeover of land, resources, and sovereignty. The lines drawn in Berlin and other European cities became the iron bars of colonial prisons, trapping millions of Africans under foreign rule and fundamentally altering the course of their history and development for generations to come. The impact of the Berlin Conference on African countries and their people was devastating and long-lasting. For instance, the Bakongo people found their kingdom split among three different colonial powers: the French Congo, the Belgian Congo, and Portuguese Angola. This division shattered their political and social unity. Similarly, the Maasai people in East Africa were divided between British Kenya and German Tanganyika, which is modern-day Tanzania, disrupting their pastoral way of life. These arbitrary borders, drawn without any local consultation, created a legacy of ethnic tension and conflict that continues to plague many African nations today, as groups found themselves as minorities in new states or in conflict with old rivals. The economic consequences were equally profound. European powers reoriented African economies to serve their own needs. They focused on extracting raw materials and forced the cultivation of cash crops like cocoa and cotton for export, often at the expense of local food production. This created a dependency on European markets that has been difficult to break. The Congo Free State, under the personal rule of King Leopold II, is an extreme example of this exploitation. The Congolese people were brutally forced to harvest rubber, with millions dying from violence, starvation, and disease. This system of economic exploitation left a legacy of underdevelopment and poverty across the continent. The political legacy of the conference is also deeply embedded in modern Africa. The artificial states created by the colonial powers lacked a shared history or national identity. After independence in the mid-20th century, many new African nations struggled to build stable governments. The inherited borders became a source of interstate wars and internal civil conflicts as different ethnic groups vied for power within the confines of the colonial state. The authoritarian structures of colonial rule also provided a poor model for democratic governance, contributing to political instability in the post-colonial era. The challenges of nation-building in Africa are directly linked to the lines drawn in Berlin. Today, the Berlin Conference remains critically important for understanding the modern world. It stands as a stark symbol of the arrogance of imperialism and the profound injustices of the colonial era. Its legacy is visible in the political borders, economic challenges, and social tensions that persist in Africa. Remembering the conference is not just about looking at the past. It is about recognizing how historical events continue to shape the present. It helps explain global inequalities and highlights the long and difficult journey of African nations to overcome a past that was imposed upon them by outside forces. A past that began with a fateful meeting in Berlin,